All right. Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? Just want to check on that before I start rambling. Great. Well, thank you all for joining me for the second session. It sounds like or it looks like we're still growing in attendance. Um, I just sent out an email with the Zoom information again. Some of you had requested I send that out before each session, which I think makes sense. And I'll keep doing that the rest of this week, and I'll try to get that to you a little bit earlier going forward. Um, for those of you that didn't join yesterday, this is the Forestry Lunch Breaks tech series session that I'm doing this week. I'm Patrick Schultz. I'm the Extension Forester with Washington State University for Southwest Washington. Today, we're going to be talking about using the Web Soil Survey. And I'm just kind of curious, and you can type into the chat box, who has used the Web Soil Survey before? Or even if you're familiar with it, let's say that. Just type into the chat box and let me know. It's got a few yeses. The fact that there's not many makes me think that this is going to be a very useful session. A bit. Okay. Good to know. Good to know. So I think this is an amazing tool. It is it's so full of information. I can't even begin to explain its potential. Especially for forest owners, or really for anyone, any form of land manager, if you're a farmer or forest owner, what have you. It's an incredibly useful tool. So I'm just going to jump right into it in an effort to give you as much time as possible for questions. Go ahead and share my screen. And I'm going to stop my video to save on bandwidth here. And I've got my chat box open. So feel free to just type away any questions that you have into the chat box throughout. As I mentioned yesterday, and if you weren't here, when you are typing into the chat box, please make sure that you click all panelists and attendees before you type it in, just so that everybody can see your question. I'll go ahead and reread the question just to be safe, but it's nice for everybody to know what's being asked. So, Web Soil Survey, I'll just go ahead and find it first. I like to just Google Web Soil Survey. It's the best way to do it because I'm pretty sure the actual link is quite long. Go ahead and click on that link, and it's going to take you to this page. And it'll tell you a little bit more about the Web Soil Survey and where it comes from, how they get the data, some tutorials as well on how to use it. So that could probably be helpful for you. Long story short, what this is an online version of what I imagine some of you have seen. It's those books from the 1970s that just described all the soil types across a given county. This is just an online form of that with much more data to back it up. And it also comes with a bunch of ratings and sort of situational tools that can tell you how suitable your land is for certain practices. So it becomes incredibly useful when it's moved onto the online format. So you click on that green button and it's going to bring you here. And there's a couple ways you can go about finding your property, but that's the first step. So you can use your address. It's pretty easy. You usually can find it pretty quickly. There's been a few addresses that I've typed in there that haven't, for whatever reason, haven't registered. If that doesn't work, you can enter in your state and county and then kind of focus in from there. You can also use your PLSS if you know that. Latitude and longitude, lots of different opportunities, ways to zoom in on your exact property. Let's see, and then there's a search here. I'm not exactly sure what that's for, but what I like to do, just like yesterday with Google Earth, I just like to zoom in and try to find it on my own. Maybe that's just because I like to be difficult. But we're going to use today, as an example, Miller, Sylvania State Park. So if anybody has ever been to Miller Sylvania State Park, that is what we're going to use. It's a really neat park just outside of Olympia, and I'm actually struggling to find it right now. There it is. So I just happen to know where that is. But again, you can type in an address, you can do whatever you want. And zooming in, I forgot to mention, is really easy. You just click on this little zoom in magnifying glass. You click and hold to draw a rectangle that you want to zoom in on. And so like I said, this is Miller Sylvania State Park. It's not going to show up with any boundaries or anything like that. It'd be really nice if this had parcel boundaries uploaded on here, but that's an incredible amount of data that they just can't stay on top of, right? Because it's changing all the time. So the first step, aside from finding your property, is to create your area of interest, which is going to be your property boundaries. And there's a couple ways to do this. If you are fortunate enough to have a shape file of your parcel boundary, I don't know a lot of landowners that do. I've given them to some landowners that have taken my classes, and some people are just a little more savvy with GIS stuff. But you can plug those in right here and it'll bring your property boundary right up. So it's a really easy way to do that. But most landowners don't have that. I don't really use this all that often, to be honest, because it doesn't have to be, just like yesterday, it doesn't have to be perfect. The property boundary doesn't have to be marked perfectly. It's not going to be for any legal purposes. So, you know, a rough idea of the property is fine. Matthew asks, can a surveyor be asked to generate a shape file? Yeah, I think definitely. It'd be very easy for them. You may even be able to talk to your county. In fact, I know some of the county websites actually have it. It's downloadable. You can actually go and download your shape file right off the internet. And I don't know how many counties that's true for, but if you really wanted one, I'm willing to bet some counties you could call up their GIS office and they would send you a shape file of your parcel. So defining your area of interest, I mean, it's exactly what it sounds like. You're just picking the area that you want to know more soils information about. And you do that by clicking one of these two red buttons here. You can see they say AOI for area of interest. This one is define AOI by rectangle, and this one is define AOI by polygon. So if you're fortunate of having a property that is a simple rectangle, all you have to do is click that one and start at a corner, click, hold, and drag, and then let go. And let's say that's your property there. That creates your area of interest. And this is where you'll get all your soils information for. You won't get soils information for anything outside of this area. If you messed up and you want to recreate it, all you have to do is hit clear AOI, and then it takes you right back to where you were before. And let's demonstrate the polygon just for fun. And that works by creating points. So every click is a point. Let's just say you go this way and here. Say we're going to go around the lake here. Really weird looking property. And then when you're done, all you got to do is double click. And then that will create your area of interest. So once that's set, you know, that's actually really the hardest part, believe it or not. So I'm just going to clear this again, and I'm going to zoom out once. You hit the zoom out magnifier, you just click. And then I just want to reset my kind of visual area real quick. And I'm going to just use a rectangle, because again, we're just doing an example here. Create my area of interest again. And I can name it if you'd like. You can just, I'm just going to call it example. You can call it, you know, Norse Tree Farm, something cool, or whatever your tree farm's name is. But that is just for the report that you're ultimately going to create here. Because now that we've defined our area of interest, what we do is click on this tab. You see you've got 4 tabs here, and we're going to just work our way down the line here. So you click on the next tab, and this is going to give you a map of your soils. And this is the reason that I wanted to look at, Miller Sylvania. I just blanked on the name because it's got so many interesting soil types. It's got a full range of soils. It's really, really interesting. So this is our area of interest with those different soil types denoted. And you can see that each polygon in here has its own number, and each number corresponds to a soil type on this table. And it actually tells you the number of acres in that soil type and the percent of the total area of interest that is covered by that soil type. You see, they even have water. So let's just click on this first one here. That's a number 2. So here's a little bit of 2. There's some 2 over here. And that's all this alderwood gravelly sand. If you click on that, this is where you can get some really good information on your soils. This is kind of the foundational information. A lot of stuff to unpack here. You know, this is pretty straightforward. A lot of this is going to be stuff you already know. It's talking about the actual climate of the region, your elevation, your frost-free period. Some of this stuff I imagine you already know. This is really important. So one of the complaints that I get a lot about Web Soil Survey is they'll see that an area of their property says that it's a silty loam. And then inevitably they say, I dug out there and I know there's some clay. So, and I'm sure that's true. There's no doubt that that's true. And that's where this comes into play. So what they're describing is the dominant condition for that area. There are still minor components. So there can be areas inside of any of those 2s that we saw that have these minor components. And then if you go all the way to the bottom, they'll describe those minor components. So it's 15%, 85% this alderwood, and then 15% the rest of this. And it even goes and shows you 5%, 5%, 3%, 2%. And it has a little kind of shorter description of those minor components. For this part, I'm not sure how useful this information really is. I think this parent material stuff is cool if you're really interested in like geologic formations and glaciers and things like that. It could be pretty neat to know, you know, what was the influenced your property over the last, you know, several 10,000 years, 100,000 years. They can go all the way down to the detail in terms of a profile of 0 to 7 inches, 7 to 21 inches, 21 to 30 inches, really going all the way down. And you can see it doesn't change much for this. It goes from gravelly sandy loam to very gravelly sandy loam all the way down. So not a lot of variability in this soil type. These properties and qualities are incredibly useful. And I think this is something that every forest owner should know about the different soil types. Well, first of all, it's going to define your slope a little bit. That's useful. The depth to restrictive layer is a very important feature to know. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's saying that somewhere between 20 and 39 inches below the soil, there is a restrictive layer that stops or slows drainage. That feeds into this drainage class, it being moderately well drained. And that's interesting, right? Because a gravelly sandy loam should be excessively well drained. You know, that doesn't hold water, but it's a combination of the fact that it has a relatively high depth to restrictive layer and very well drained soil on top of that. Those 2 features combine to make the soil type moderately well drained. And you kind of keep moving down, and you can see depth to water table is 18 to 37 inches. Of course, that checks out with there being a depth to restrictive layer being about 20 to 39 inches. Frequency of ponding, none. Frequency of flooding, none. And that's all because, again, this stuff it drains really well. So all that water is going down and then slicking off underneath. But this is really good information to have, especially when you're thinking about planting trees and trying to pick a species that's going to like something that can be, something that can handle really, really dry periods, but also have a water table that's only about 18 inches, as high as 18 inches below the soil. And then you get to these interpretive groups. These are a little less useful. I think these are more for internal NRCS uses. I don't typically bother with them. So each of these descriptions is available for every one of these soil types. I won't go over each of them, but you can learn a lot about your property this way. And it takes all of that information and it creates these ratings and suitabilities that I mentioned. So before I get into that, though, I just want to say that I already mentioned that what you do with the web soil survey is ultimately creating a report. By default, as soon as you enter your area of interest, your report includes that area of interest and this information here, your basic soils information. But if you wanted to go and do a little bit more, you can click on the next tab, and it's the Soil Data Explorer. And this is where what I meant when I said there is just an insane amount of data available to include in your report. You could easily create a 300 to 400 page report here, just working through all of these suitabilities and limitation ratings. And so I'll go over a couple examples, but basically what they're doing, as I mentioned, is they're taking those soil properties and applying them to different practices and applying a rating of suitability, whether or not that will work here. So there's a lot that are really good for forestry here. There's some that are just absolutely nutty, like there's some military operations, helicopter landing zones. This is one I always like to look at for fun. See if your property is good for a helicopter landing zone. Doesn't look too good here, as you can see. But this is what it's going to show up every time you do a rating. It's going to give each polygon a color based off that rating. Typically, red is bad and yellow is moderate and green is good, and it kind of goes on a scale from there. I always stress not to just look at the colors, though. You have to go down here and look at each of these soil types, and it'll tell you what that rating is. So very limited, somewhat limited, all the way down the line. Can't land helicopters here. Got it. But it's important not to just look at the colors because it's relative to the ratings inside of that. So if the worst rating you have is moderately well suited, that's going to be red. So you just have to make sure you're looking at these. So let's do something that's actually related to forestry real quick. So the land management tab is a really good one. This is one that every forester or forest owner should look at. It's compaction potential, and you can see if it's got this little Washington in parentheses, that means that rating was created specifically for Washington. So again, you just click on the tab, drop down the menu, and you hit View Rating, and it's going to bring up the compaction potential for each of these soil types. So you can see we've got some reds, some that are a little more susceptible, yellow, greens looking a little bit better, but come back down and look at the table. And it more or less reflects that. So let's see, 66 has a really high, this Melbourne silty clay loam has a really high potential for compaction. And that 66 is right here. So you can see that reflected. Really good to know. Oops, I screwed up there. It's good information to have when you're considering doing any kind of management, especially if you're going to be running heavy equipment out there or creating roads, that kind of thing. Now, if you want to add this to your report, all you have to do is hit Add to Shopping Cart. And it's weird. It's weird to me that they chose that phrase. You just hit OK once you hit Add to Shopping Cart, and now that's in your report, but it's completely free. That you don't have to pay for anything. The shopping cart implies that you're paying for something, but you're not. So there's all kinds of different ratings that are relevant to forest ownership, and I'm actually going to follow up with an email today with some of the best ones the ones that I think pertain to forest ownerships the most. I'm also going to follow up with a guide written by a friend of mine who actually goes out and ground truths a lot of the data for this survey information. One of the most common questions I get, and one of the pressing questions that I had when I started doing this line of work was, how do they know all this? Well, they project it based off of topography, hydrology, geological formations, but they do actually go out on the ground and ground truth it. Not at every house, not in every square mile, but they do enough to make it with pretty good certainty that that these soil types are accurate. And most of the time, they are. You go out and you dig, and it reflects the soil report. So one other one I wanted to show was vegetative productivity, just because there's a little extra in terms of what you can get out of this. And I wanted to show you how to do that. So forest productivity, we would look at tree site index. And this is just a rating of how well trees grow at a given site. So for those of you that don't know, it's based on how tall a tree grows in 50 years. So we do that for different species, and you can look at red alder and Doug fir here. Sometimes, especially if you're out towards the coast, you can get like Sitka spruce. It all depends on where the data is available. But let's just do Doug fir for now. Hit the view rating, and it's going to come up with a bunch of wacky colors. And this is, again, why it's so important to go down and look at the table. And it's these numbers right here. This is going to give you your site index. That's how tall a tree, a Doug fir, is expected to grow on that soil type in 50 years. The DNR then takes these numbers and they put them into buckets, like site 1, site 2, site 3, site 4, with site 1 being the best. And I think site 1 is, I could be wrong, but I think it's anything over 130. So we've got some pretty high site ground right in here. But this is really important information to have for a forest owner too, right? You can see how well your property does in terms of growing Doug fir. Let's look at red alder real quick. And you can see that there's very limited data available. All of this gray is just, it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means they don't have data for that kind of soil type. So, take what you will from that. They just haven't expanded that. And I actually think they are working on expanding the red alder site index rating. But you can see at least this 120 here has got some good, relatively good red alder site index. So let's just add that to the shopping cart too for fun. So now we've got the compaction potential and the forest productivity for red alder. Again, you could just sift through these all day and find all kinds of stuff to add, off-road erosion potential. Let's view that. So we're pretty good on erosion at this property. There's some severes, mostly moderates and slights. Let's add that to the shopping cart as well. And keep in mind, all of this information will be included in the report. So it can't hurt to have a long report. That's what I always say. Just include it, and then you have it for later. There are other tabs inside of the Soil Data Explorers. I don't usually mess with these. You can get into soil chemical properties, soil physical properties. I tend to stick to just the suitabilities and limitations because I'm not a soil scientist by any means. There is an option to download soils data. I've never done it. I don't know that you would find that particularly useful. So I'm just going to skip over that and get over to the report creation. So again, we added report data. We have our basic soils data that I talked about in the beginning. That goes in by default. And so that's right here in the soils map. Soil map, map unit description. That's what they're referring to there. The Soil Data Explorer, as I mentioned, we have under the Land Management tab, compaction potential and erosion hazard, and then vegetative productivity, we've got red alder site index. So those are the 3 reports that we added to the shopping cart. We ran a lot more, but we didn't add them all. And you can go and remove some if you want, add them back. You know, that's up to you. But once you're here, it's really quite easy. All you got to do is hit checkout, and you can select a delivery method. You can either get that report now, or you can download it later. And the perk of downloading it later is that they send you a link, and you will always have that link to go back to. I'm just going to say get it now because it's a relatively small report, so it should whip it out relatively quickly. I will say this website can be a little clunky at times. I think I broke it earlier today. That's why I'm in an incognito tab. So you do have to be a little bit careful, but there we go. We've got our custom soil report for our area of interest. We've got, let's see, let's just skip down. There's our soil map, map legend, table. We've got our descriptions of the soils. And then let's see, there's one of our reports there. There's the compaction one. So it all generates a really nice, neat little report. So I got a few questions. We've got a few minutes left. Please feel free to type any questions you have. Emil asks, is each suitability map a separate report? Does this work for national forests and national parks? Each suitability map is not a separate report. No, as you can see here, they put it all together into one. Although if you wanted to run them separately when you were looking at the, let's see if it's still there. Yeah, if you're going back to this table of contents, like I said, you could just get rid of everything but the one report that you wanted. And then that would just print out a singular report if that's how you wanted to do it. Does this work for national forests and national parks? Yes, with the caveat that I know there are some that have not been mapped yet. In fact, the friend that I mentioned who I wanted to give this report or give this presentation is actually busy doing his job in the Olympic National Park. So they are either updating or establishing soils data for all of the Olympic National Park, which is a pretty cool job if you ask me. So I know they're working on it, and I can't say that it's true across all national forests and national parks, but I think several of them, that data is available. Paul Campbell asks, forest productivity values may be used by county to compute tax rate based on values in RCW. Not to my knowledge, no. The tax rate is not based on the productivity of the ground, at least not with the designated forest land program. That's a tax deferral program. That is just based off of the timber that you pull off for a given logging job. So it's a set excise tax, and it's not based off of any sort of ground productivity. There may be other tax programs that factor in site productivity, but I'm not aware of them. So sort of a half answer to your question, but I hope that helps. So it looks like we wrapped up a little early today. Like I said, this program is extremely useful. It's pretty straightforward. I think it could use some updating, even just in style. It looks a little old, but again, just enormous amounts of data here to be used for forest owners. Like I said, I'll follow up with a list of common reports used by forest owners and a PDF of a manual that the NRCS agent I mentioned created for people to use this program. And I'll also send you his contact information because part of his job is helping people explore this data. So hopefully that will be of use to y'all. Linda commented, was appalled after a logger came on to an area adjacent to my property. Is now sandy soil with poor replant material or potential. I'm not aware of any rules on topsoil removal and logging. It's not really a common practice to remove topsoil. Things get really scarred up during the logging process, that's for sure, no doubt about that. but my guess is there was no soil actually. I mean, I can't say for sure, but it's not a common thing to actually remove soil. So if there was sandy soil there, it was there before. And organic matter will recover over time as well. So that is unfortunate that they are not able to get trees replanted there, though, it sounds like. Mike asked if a recording will be available. Yes, it definitely will. I will send those out next week, most likely. Any other questions before we log off? Does not look like it. So I will say goodbye and see you all tomorrow. And tomorrow we'll be discussing Plot Hound and how to use that program for just forest inventory, collecting data on the actual trees and other vegetation growing on your property. So it should be a really good talk. And that's with Brendan White, who's a fellow extension forester. All right, everybody, have a good day.